Hello, good folks. Why am I so small? What's going on here? How do I blow myself up? Uh, ah, that's better. Hello, good people, and welcome to Hell in a Handbasket. This is open mic number 7. I have put the link into the comments section. If you'd like to join, please feel free to do so. Happy to have you here. And everyone's welcome to offer their opinion on whatever. News about me. Well, the last week has been fun. I'm actually, I don't know if you can see it. I'm actually wearing my Stranger Things shirt today. I I'd never seen the show. I'm not much of a Hollywood movie, TV, video movie guy, but my daughter wanted to watch the series with me, so she asked me if we could watch it. So her and I have been going through it the last week or so, and it's a lot of fun, to be honest with you. Much better than I thought it would be. And if you grew up in the 80s or 90s, like I did, a lot of nostalgia too. Really brings you back, like, everything about the show is so 80s, right? So I wore my shirt today, my Stranger Things shirt today, in honor of my daughter and I going through the series. We're now on season 3, so don't ruin it for me. So far, so good. What are we going to chat about today? Well, I have a few things on the agenda. Let me get a sip to wet my whistle. The biggest, I guess, geopolitical events of the last week, for once, hasn't been in Iran or Ukraine. So that was a welcome change. uh, Basically, what happened was a mass invasion along the Spanish coast there in a little enclave called uh, Ceuta, or as they say in Spain, Ceuta. Ceuta. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Ceuta, which I'm not, I like to be honest with you, I had been to Spain. I've been to Spain before, up and down, left and right. Never heard of Ceuta until, until this past week. So it was a learning lesson for me. But basically, if I whip up my little map, let me just add that to stage. Well, now, why isn't the I really got to get better at this. So here's your map. Morocco, we've got Spain, Gibraltar. This is the Mediterranean Sea, as you can see, and Ceuta is this little tiny enclave here on the African coast. Um, Let me just zoom in to a bigger picture. So as you can see, here's Spain here, Morocco is there, and you've got this little enclave um, on the coast here that's carved out, which is a part of Spain. Uh, so when the invasion of the migrants first happened, I said, where the hell is Ceuta? And I looked into it and I found this little enclave that honestly I didn't know existed. I did not know that there was a part of Spain still on the African continent. But there you go. So news for me too. But basically, this has been under Spanish rule since the Spanish Empire back in the 16th century. So, and it's a really important choke point because as you can see here, you've got, as MM says in the comments, you've got the Strait of Gibraltar right here, and then you've got Ceuta right here. So Spain effectively controls the in and out of the Mediterranean Sea through the port of Gibraltar here, or the Strait of Gibraltar, I should say. And then on the other side, you've got Ceuta, which also gives them a certain amount of control over it. So, and there's been long-standing border disputes between Morocco and Spain over this little enclave. Morocco claims that it should be returned to them because it is part of the African continent. And, Spain, colonialist, blah, blah, blah. It should be part of Morocco and not Spain. So, where Spain argues that it is and has been part of the Spanish Empire, if we're still calling Spanish Empire an empire, it's been part of their realm for the last 500 years. Um, I don't know the answer. I don't know who's right or who's wrong. I haven't looked in that deeply to it. But from what I can gather, the people there seem to want to remain with Spain and they consider themselves Spanish. So it's sort of a non issue. It's kind of like the Falkland Islands and the Malvinas in a way. Uh, Much different. You've got the Falklands down off the coast of Argentina, which has been a British colony for 200 or 300 years now. And the Argentinians claim that it's part of their territory. The British claim it's part of theirs. Now, what I can tell you about that conflict is that I've actually been to the Falkland Islands once, and they were all pretty rapidly. Well, first of all, if you go to the Falkland Islands, the first thing you'll realize is that it's basically a retirement home for British expats. And basically, everybody there is very white, very old, very British, and they have no desire whatsoever to be part of Argentina. So I guess in and of itself, that's good enough for me. They held a referendum about it a decade or two ago, and they voted overwhelmingly to be part of Britain. So to me, it's kind of a dead issue there. Really, it depends on the will of the people. This is a similar situation whereby I don't think that there's a huge clamoring of anybody there to join Morocco. And, it's geopolitics, and you see this all over. So, fast forward into the 21st century, you've got this little enclave that popped up in the news last week. I should have had a clip of it, but I neglected to grab one. So what then happened? You had approximately 60,000 migrants who effectively what they did, they basically swam from here over to here. So they took rafts and some of them swam and so on and so forth. And they basically went around the border and they hit land in Ceuta in droves, literally droves. You had 60,000 people all arriving at the same time, overwhelmed the people in the town. Now, keep in mind, in this little enclave, there's not a whole lot of people. It's about 80,000 locals are there. So effectively, you've got what 80% of your population showing up on your shores uh, one day out of nowhere, and they were all predominantly young men. They crossed over that border. As I said, they effectively just swam around it. And the influx occurred over a period of a couple of days, with many migrants attempting to swim around the breakwaters and scale whatever border fence was there. It wasn't much of a fence. It ended up resulting in a tragic loss of life. I think the last count I saw was there were 57 bodies recovered, people drowning and whatnot. Um, and then once they got there, I've got to add you to the stage. How you doing?
Good, good. I just wanted to jump on to talk about this Spain story.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, well, I was thinking that it just seems like a political stunt that sort of
Oh,
has yeah, that sort of
oh yeah.
has two
We'll get to
aspects.
that.
Oh, okay, yeah, go ahead.
Well, basically, once they all showed up there, Obviously, there was a lot of violence breaking out between the migrants rushing in, the locals. There's a lot of video online of looting going on, fights going on between the locals and the migrants there. Uh, you know, Basically, then you had the Prime Minister of Spain, Pedro Sanchez. He has attributed the surge to human trafficking networks. However, there's widespread speculation that this sudden opening of the Morocco borders, which facilitated these mass crossings, was also partly driven by political motives, as you said. Um, I guess what I'm saying is, the unprecedented nature of the event led to Spain. They've deployed some military forces, and Sanchez has condemned the influx as being a violation of territorial integrity. Uh, so now, fast forward a couple days into the future, my understanding is of the last count I got was of the 60,000, about 50,000 or so of them have already returned back to Morocco. But there's still a lot of migrants still there in Ceuta. And now we get to the reasons why. And that's the fun part of geopolitics. I don't think this is organic whatsoever. It's not like 60,000 people decide one day to cross the border. This was something that was planned and organized. And I guess the question for us in this geopolitical headspace is to figure out who and why. So I will stop right here and I'll let you take the floor. Let me know what you think.
Yeah, so I think there's two different scenarios that it could be. One was just to embarrass Spain, like the here in America, our president was upset about them not giving enough money to NATO or stuff like that. Israel's upset that they kind of are siding with the Palestinian issue. And then the other thing is that it has spurred European leaders, like in Italy for sure. I don't know about the other countries, to be like, oh, we're not letting in these immigrants, so we're not going to let, the free flow of people into Italy. So I just think, like you said, there's no way that all of those people decided on the same day they were just going to rush the barricade. It was definitely coordinated somehow. And I think that it almost like feeds into it that all the video for sure was kind of shocking. And it's just feeding into this sort of narrative that they're trying to push, whatever that may be.
100%. And you start to look at some of the uh, what's the word that they use in crime, where you don't have a smoking gun, but you've got all of this other evidence.
Sort of
It's like
circumstantial.
yes, circumstantial. That's the word. Thank you. And you start piecing the things together, and you kind of say to yourself, who actually planned this? So, and why? And I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that Spain has a lot of detractors, certainly in the United States, but also in Europe, because they're not playing ball with this united Europe, all for one and one for all positioning on a number of things. And the primary one that comes up for me is the genocide going on in Palestine right now. To their credit, Spain, along with South Africa, were two of the first nations to put forward Bibi Netanyahu for war crimes in front of the ICC and the ICJ. So that caused a lot of turmoil between Spain and Israel, as well as Israel and South Africa, which continues to this day. And so that was one thing. And then the next thing that came up was once the conflict in Iran broke out, Spain was the first country in Europe to deny the US to allow them using their airspace for bombing
Yeah, that's
campaigns.
right.
So that really angered Donald Trump as well. So there was a lot of tit for tat going on between Donald Trump and Pedro Sanchez. I'll say, what was it, maybe a month ago or so? And Trump was condemning Spain and basically saying, we're going to cut off trade with Spain. We're going to kick Spain out of NATO because they're not playing ball. And Sanchez replied very bluntly and said, yeah, do whatever you want. Just leave us alone. So I think that equally pissed off Trump because, you know, his threats weren't going anywhere with the Spanish government or the Spanish people. So we fast forward a couple weeks after that happened, and this popped up. Let me just share it. This popped up a couple weeks back. This is a message from Donald Trump to King Mohammed in Morocco. And basically, what Morocco announced through King Mohammed was that there's this new there's an existing highway in Morocco that they are going to rename it after Donald Trump. We'll call it the Donald Trump Highway. And so Donald Trump replied back and said, thank you very much. As you could see, blah, blah, blah. This is political speak for, thanking each other for, having solidarity with one another, yada, yada, yada. And you say to yourself, at least I said to myself a couple weeks ago before this broke out, I remember seeing this announcement, and I said to myself, well, why would Morocco name a highway after Donald Trump? And obviously, it comes back to Morocco's own self interests. So there's a region in Africa right next to Morocco that's called Western Sahara. And Morocco claims ownership over that territory, whereas other nations in the Sahel, and particularly the people in the Western Sahara, say that no, we're not part of Morocco, we're our own independent nation, et cetera, et cetera. So the Americans, as well as the Israeli government, they both support Morocco's claim to the Western Sahara. So that carries a lot of political weight when a country like the United States supports your claim. So that was the first thing. So I figured at the time, okay, well, they're just, stroking Trump's ego because they need his support for this claim over the Western Sahara. And then once this whole thing broke out, I said to myself, I see what's going on now. And I think Thomas Massey actually confirmed it as well. Massey released a tweet last week basically saying, don't believe the mainstream media or anything like that. They did a budget vote a couple weeks ago in the House, in the U.S. House of Congress, and part of that, I think it was a budget bill or something, but buried within the text, uh, they actually talk about number one, Morocco's claim to the Western Sahara, and they also state Morocco's claim to Ceuta being valid as well. And it's only like one sentence in the whole bill. And Massey he tweeted it and he highlighted the statement. And so you can find that on X or whatever under Thomas Massey. It's right there. I should have taken a print screen. But anyway, what Massey was saying is, listen, none of this is organic. We had a vote on something completely off topic like last week or 2 weeks ago. Every single Republican in the House, except for me, voted for this. And it's right there in black and white that, the United States is backing Morocco's claims to Western Sahara and Ceuta. So he was basically saying, don't believe for a second that any of this is organic. It's all being orchestrated by the American government and or the Israelis. Uh, so, whether or not that's true or not, once you start piecing it all together, it kind of makes sense. Why would South or why would Morocco build name this road after Trump? And why is that important? Why was it brought up in the news in the first place? Why would Congress put in to this bill, which has nothing to do with, Morocco at all, about their claims over places like Ceuta and Western Sahara? And now you fast forward another couple weeks, why or a week and a half, why are all these migrants now all coming in on the same day? So once you piece together all the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, it seems pretty clear to me that this is an orchestrated attempt by the Americans and or the Israeli government to basically cause a lot of pain for Spain, both within their country as well as in Europe. Because as we saw, what happened after this is a lot of European states started turning on Spain as well and basically saying, we're going to kick you guys out of the Schengen area. Uh, we don't believe that you have your border secure. So I'm not really clear whose side the rest of them on. I'll shut up and let you talk and let me know what you think.
Well, the thing about Thomas Massey is interesting. I missed that because I'm not on X, but I think that it's a travesty that he won't be in Congress anymore because this was the best thing about him is that he would highlight these crazy things that they plug in to these huge bills. So, and
Yeah.
like you said, why are we saying anything about Morocco in our own budget? Like that's insane. But yeah, I missed that and I pay pretty close attention to all this stuff. So it's super
If
interesting.
if I can find it, I'll post it in Telegram. But yeah, he posted something like that just last week. I thought I had taken a snapshot of it, but obviously I didn't. It's not on my desktop. But yeah, he basically said this is not organic and it's all part of the plan. Now, what the plan is, I think primarily right now is how do we cause pain to Spain? And then more longer term, how do we wrest control away from of the both the Strait of Gibraltar as well as the Uto? How do we wrest control away from these Europeans who we don't particularly like or trust? Now, why they would put any stock into Morocco, your guess is as good as mine. But I think if you were to look at King Mohammed's relationships over the years, Morocco for an Arab state, they're pretty closely linked with the Israelis for some strange reason. And I've never really been able to figure it out. But Morocco more or less is a very good vassal state for the Americans in Africa. They're about as good a vassal state as you're going to find in Africa. Let's just put it that way. So I think longer term is how do we gain access to all of these choke points because it ties into what's his name, Eldridge Colby. Uh, he's got this grand plan about how America can remain dominant in the 21st century. And it's all around number one, controlling resources, primarily oil, and number two, controlling those choke points for transit of oil and or any goods. And that's why you see Trump going around like a madman claiming ownership of the Panama Canal, claiming ownership of Canada, Greenland, claiming ownership of the Strait of Hormuz, um, because that's
Well,
what they effectively want to get to.
I don't know about ownership, but I'm definitely in favor
Control.
of
Yeah.
America being, more involved in places like Greenland and the Panama Canal and, the Arctic than dealing with Morocco and the Strait of Gibraltar, and definitely not Iran and, the Strait of Hormuz. Because as even the president says, we don't super need the Strait of Hormuz. That is mainly like Europe, Asia, India. So, like, it just doesn't make sense that we're expending all of these resources all over the world when,
Well,
yeah, I would, if we're gonna be throwing our might around, we may as well be like annexing Canada instead of these crazy foreign, on the other side of the globe.
but you got to understand it's not so it's control of the choke points, because if you control the choke points, you can, number one, deny access to your enemies, and number two, it's all about prolonging the petrodollar, right? And right now, you've got all of these countries around the world, either friend or foe, who are de-dollarizing their economies. And what does that mean for the US? If they don't have the petrodollar system, the whole house of cards collapses. So I think the geostrategic thinking of these guys like Colby, is this is going to help maintain the USD as the global, currency, when all the other forces in the world are pushing against it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that the petrodollar is not as crucial at this point because even Saudi Arabia is starting to accept payments in other currencies. But I think the US dollar is still going to be important as like a global currency because of the just the consumer base at this point. So even if the petro situation totally collapsed overnight, I think it would take a very long time before dollar the dollar collapsed.
Uh, yeah, I mean, yes and no. You look at If you were to look at the US dollar, uh, let's say 20, 25 years ago, it had some crazy amount of trade, like over 80% of global trade was in US dollars. And now I think that number is down to something like 53%. And in the last several years, particularly since the Ukraine conflict broke out, in the last several years, it has gone down. I think it's gone down from, don't quote me, but it was like 59% in 2022. Now it's down to 53 or something like that. That's a big swing in a few years. You know what I mean? And the problem with that is you've got this global economy that is just swimming in US dollars, right? Because US has got a $40 trillion debt. So all of that money is still floating out there. And unless they can get buyers to buy more treasuries when they come due and when they do auctions and things like that, well, what happens to all those dollars? They come back to the US. That's why you're seeing inflation in the US, because all those dollars are coming home from foreign buyers. So if they don't have a country like a Japan is a good example, and maybe we can talk about Japan more because they just did an intervention last week. But if you don't have countries like the Japans, the Chinas, these big players, the Gulf states, who are just soaking up all of these treasuries, then who buys them? If the answer is no one, well, you've got inflation skyrockets. So, and that's
Right,
why.
but I think you're coming at this from a more like rational point of view, and the American financial system is not rational. Like you said, it's a house of
Totally.
cards, but
Yes.
they're printing the cards. Like they can just keep building. I'm not good at this metaphor, But there's so many mechanisms in place that don't make sense, but they're what's keeping everything going. So the whatever 40 trillion in debt is not as detrimental to our economy and the dollar as people give it credit for, because these other countries are buying. Like China has a lot of our debt, but they also buy a ton of soy, because we had that whole issue, and other things. So the dollars are coming back through getting through like purchases of goods and stuff. So having debt isn't a big deal. 40 trillion is a little excessive as far as the treasuries go, but they're not going to get cashed in all at once. Like it's just sort of an ongoing. It's like a Ponzi scheme with no end in sight. Like they're just going to keep it going.
Uh, but that's the thing. I don't think the foreign players are interested anymore, and that's the problem. The problem now is if you don't have central banks like the Bank of China, Bank of Japan, uh, Europe, Canada, countries like this, which have big economies who reinvest their surpluses into US treasuries, if they don't have that, then who's going to buy them? And the answer is the only people that the treasury can get to buy them now are the big US banks. So you've got the big US banks who are buying these treasuries. All of that money stays within the United States, and the big banks, and that's just creating more and more inflation. Like, think about it. The Fed's target is 2%. When was the last time we've seen an inflation rate in the US below 2%? The answer is, I think it was 2020. So that's 6 years of being higher than what your target is. And when I say higher, the last I saw, the last inflation report, I think inflation was at 3.8%. That's basically double the Fed target, right? And a lot of that has to do with, they're not getting any foreign investment at all, and they're just recirculating money throughout the US system. So I do think it's more important than you probably think, because it all comes back to inflation. If they don't get uh, the Bank of Japan or any central government, foreign central government for that matter, to hold or furthermore buy more US treasuries, all of that money comes back to the US eventually. And that's where you get inflation. That's the definition of inflation. Too much money
Well,
chasing too few goods.
right. Again, I just think that it's not, it's so irrational the way that our financial system works, that what you say makes sense, but it's not going to come to pass. Especially because I think people do conflate inflation with just rising costs. Like the rising cost of fuel, uh, increases the price of everything, which is different than the inflation of like the money, like you're saying, where there's too much dollars in the system. And again, I just don't think it depends on if we're printing the bonds, the treasury bonds for people to buy, or if we're just. I mean, it's crazy, but they just inject fake money into the money markets for the big banks. That it doesn't the money doesn't exist except for in a computer. So as long as people are still have faith in the dollar, then the whole system keeps going. So I just think that people are not going to lose the dollar the way that they would if they were like realistic. I guess they're just, it's not reality.
What do you guys think? Welcome, Coping. Welcome, Gabriel. Nice to see you guys.
Hello, hello. Oh, it's Gabriel or you? I think you need to take away the shared screen because I just first now I
Uh,
saw myself.
All
I
right.
wasn't even sure if
One
you could
sec.
see me because I haven't adjusted the lighting.
All right. Let me remove this.
Yeah, he's
Yeah,
sitting
well,
by that
I
pinned
wanted
mark.
to. Oh, here we go, Gabriel too. I wanted to. If we haven't left the topic of Morocco and Spain, I thought you
Yeah, sure.
covered it pretty well, but I wanted to kind of add a few things. Um, let's see, where was I? So, like, well, first of all, this is not the first time Morocco has done this. They have done this several times towards Spain, not to this scale and not so brazenly like this, but they have been shipping, and like they did it this time too. They actually trucked people over to the border. So it is staged, no doubt about it. This is not, like you said, organic. It doesn't happen overnight. And they have, you mentioned Western Sahara, just to kind of not to digress too much, but that is one of the places they did so. I think they called it the Green Revolution or something. Don't quote me on that.
Green
You
March.
can look, you can look
Green
it up
March.
from the Green March. Thank you. Yeah. So it was then the king of Morocco had basically astroturfed a whole bunch of people up to the border of the Western Sahara to kind of try to basically fabricate legitimacy for the takeover. Um, and that one is just generally not recognized, kind of more so. But anyways, and as for Spain having a colonial possession in Ceuta, the thing is worth noting that prior to, like, Spain was also conquered for like several centuries. The so-called Reconquista took several centuries, so that during that period, Morocco, in a sense, was colonizing Spain. So I think it's like you said, it's kind of like it's a moot point because they've had like 1,000 years back and forth like that, anyways.
Wait, Morocco didn't exist back then as a nation. To be fair, neither did Spain. However, the Spanish crown has had control over northern Africa. Those places are kind of tied together all the way back to the Phoenicians.
Well,
Okay,
no, because there was the Islamic conquest that brought them over. That's true. It was not like the Moroccan state as we know it, but they were the Berbers and Amazighs back then. But anyways, not to digress too much on that, because Spain, it's true as well. Spain was not like one country; it was a multitude of kingdoms. That I mean, one of the reasons that the Islamic conquest was so successful in the beginning was precisely because there were kings who were trying to get them over to fight their rivals, right? So which brings me back to a different aspect here, which hasn't been touched on, because while Spain has notably not played ball with NATO as it pertains to the Iran conflict, the one thing that has been brought up here, I think it was Teg who mentioned it, or maybe it was you, Nuno, mentioned Italy, and I believe it was a few other countries that wanted to take Spain out of the Schengen. Now, this one has actually been floated earlier, and I believe it was some time before but not long before, shortly before the Iran conflict broke out. The Spanish government had was going to grant a permit for up to 500,000 or so illegal immigrants, which is not necessarily voting rights, but it's kind of like a step in that direction rather than having them deported. And for most people, at least on the political opposition, they consider that to be in order to manufacture for getting votes. We've seen this before throughout Europe. And this is one of the reasons some countries have already been like, yeah, okay, Spain, you are so reckless with this that, like, even for our already hyper tolerant standards, you are kind of getting too much out of line. So with this one happening, it kind of like a natural trigger for something that's already been laying around. Not saying that other stuff may not be coming involved, like you mentioned with Trump Highway and stuff like that. Though one may very well be also tied to Trump's recognition of Western Sahara as belonging to Morocco, and they did that in part of it as with an exchange of recognition of Israel, right? So that's why they have also had now since 2020, I believe, they've had quite a bit of cooperation. So the Moroccans have been using drones and miscellaneous. They've had the Israeli advisors over, and whatnot. So there's, like, of course, there's more to that. But back to the king, because I know I'm talking about. I'm just gonna finish because this is one thing that has not been noted too much. At least I didn't hear it earlier here, and that was oh wow, Twin Gabriel, and that was that if you look the border, first of all, like that wall, it doesn't go far out into the ocean. Like there were parts of it that just simply walked through it. They didn't have to swim and didn't have to use rafts. Another thing that was very noteworthy was pretty much no border guards. And the few instances where I did see them, they just let them pass through or even just open the gate. Now, maybe AI, I don't know, but it is very telling that considering this has happened before and there was such a like an atrociously low level of border security, there is a good chance that there is some cooperation behind the scenes with Pedro Sanchez and Morocco. Like it may not only be wanting to punish Trump, for example, want to, I think Israel too, kind of like, but I think they have more on their hands to care about than Spain in that regard. Um, but yeah, they're enjoying this as well, of course. But the Pedro Sanchez is considered very much a traitor, and this kind of thing here is something that if you couple that with them trying his party trying to legislate for, and did successfully legislate for, permitting, fast tracking permitting for over 500,000 illegal immigrants, right? Then you can kind of see like, yeah, maybe there was something behind there for an agreement between Pedro and the Moroccans. So like, yeah, I mean, it's a pretty nasty clusterfuck, to put it mildly. But yeah, I thought it was worth mentioning because having no, like, it's one thing is Morocco and all that, but another thing is Spain. No border guards, no nothing. And when they had responses, there was a lot. I'm not sure how confirmed this is, but a lot of the responses from law enforcement went after the citizens of Ceuta, or whatever how you pronounce it, to the mobs there, like the clashes that were there. The police went to break them up, but they also went to arrest the citizens, right? Which, the optics of that is, of course, rather damaging for the Spanish government. So, yeah, I thought I'd just throw that in there and all the other.
What are your thoughts, Gabriel?
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Hear you well.
Yeah.
Hear you well.
Great. My reception is kind of poor right now because of weather conditions, but let's see how long I last. Okay, so first of all, the issue of the Moroccan sort of soft invasion or unarmed invasions is definitely a thing. There has been several of those cases. Spain, on the other hand, the ruling party right now, it's basically a German puppet. So the party, it's called PSOE, PSOE, and it means like socialist workers Spanish party. And the thing is that it was basically funded and created after the Franco regime. It was created to co-opt Spain for the central EU powers that were expanding their influence. And so one of their major legacy was massive privatizations. Like, Franco was he was like a right-wing dictator, right? But it's a common joke in Spain that Franco was way more socialist than the socialist party, than the PSOE, because he sort of nationalized a bunch of industries and strengthened unions and created like houses for the people. So in many ways, it was a form of socialist right. And one of the things that this party has done since it came into power at the end of the dictatorship was to dismantle all of this social autarky and nationalized industry of Spain. Dismantle and privatize, sell it. So the thing is that this party has been in power for a long time, in and out, but mostly in power, and they've always been doing the EU central bidding, and that has put it in a very bad position economically and socially and politically. And the thing is that, lately Pedro Sanchez has been doing some interesting maneuvers in so far as its geopolitical influence. The opposition to Israel has gained a lot of popularity, and also he's been strengthening ties with Algeria, which is the enemy of Morocco in North Africa. They hate each other's guts. And Morocco is notoriously in good relations with the United States and Israel. And so Morocco has been this sort of wedge in Northern Africa. Algeria is a counter to it because it's also a big country. Libya was also a strong counter to it, but Libya is out of the picture. And so the thing is that, this party and Pedro Sanchez, for all their betrayals and faults, they have been very slightly or gradually positioning themselves to a stronger influence. And it is in the choke point of the Mediterranean. So I think that there is a strong, like Coping said, a strong element of betrayal in the Pedro Sanchez PSOE government towards Spanish interests, but there's also a very it's hard to tell if it's like internal demagoguery or if they're trying to wiggle some level of influence. Anyway, there's been a huge backlash for that. So there's a bunch of corruption cases jumping out against the party and the prime minister himself and so on, and now this. Now, it seems like it was an inside job, like Spanish security forces were kind of letting them in, but we have to see how it plays out because allegedly, reportedly, what Ceuta did basically was close everything, shut everything down, and so all the Moroccans that flocked in got stranded, and then they had to move back. So there wasn't like a reception capacity for receiving all these people, and so the report is that most of them have gone back. And also there was, during the incident, there was several threats from Republicans and other EU leaders and Israeli politicians that Spain better not use force on these refugees. And so maybe not, we have to see how it plays out, but maybe it was actually a form of, it was a way of trying to elicit a violent reaction, a response from Spain that would allow for global condemnation. They wanted the army start shooting people, dead refugees on the streets, terrible, fascism is back, Pedro Sanchez is a dictator, we're gonna kick him out. Now, I have no love or I have no sympathy for Pedro Sanchez at all. But I do recognize that he has been doing some interesting geopolitical moves that are beneficial to himself. Maybe to Spain, hard to tell yet. But the thing is that it is a delicate situation. Like, Spain is on a tightrope. Pedro Sanchez is on a tightrope. And so how responded to this was a very delicate issue. And like, who knows, maybe a bunch of them stay, but maybe it was the best way to like kick them out was to avoid confrontation. We will see. Can you guys hear me? There's a lot of noise here.
Yeah, it was just towards the end you were starting to break up a little bit, but you weren't lost for so long that we lost you, so to speak. So it's
Yeah, we can hear you. All good points, particularly about Algeria, uh, which I hadn't thought about, but that's kind of like a geopolitical side quest because, as you said, and I just threw up the map here, Algeria and Morocco, not the best of friends. Algeria is steadfast against Morocco's control over the Western Sahara, which is right here. And the other big thing that maybe people don't know is Algeria is a major supplier of oil and gas, right? And a lot of European gas comes from Algeria up through Spain. Actually, I just read maybe a month ago that Spain and Algeria had come to some sort of agreement about creating a new pipeline. So another, like I said, a side quest in all of this, going back to my previous point about U.S. wanting to control the oil and gas as well as the choke points. If they
hey,
can
Gabriel,
cause,
please mute.
yeah, if they can cause any sort of disruption to Algeria's current position and their dominance of supplying gas to the EU as well as other places, that needs to be considered as well. Tigger, do you have a comment? I think you wanted to say something.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to say Gabriel had said that it might be an inside job, and some of the guards were letting people in, which I have no idea about the inside job stuff. But also, we had to think about if there's tens of thousands of people coming through and a handful of border guards, there's not a whole lot they're going to be able to do regardless to stop them. So it could be that they were letting them in so that they weren't getting trampled, or, I mean, there could be a lot of factors. But on the other hand, it could be anything.
Sure. Well,
one of
and
the
we
reasons
also
the suspicion is because they've had such a migration pressure there before with people breaking in and they're trying to do so in groups and in masses. And there have been times where the Moroccan government has been allegedly coming with trucks and dumping off people. And this time around, the accusations that are also whirling around are that one of the ways that the Moroccan government managed to get the mass this many. Noticed it was only men, pretty much only. Like you might have a few hijabi women, but they would be like, I guess, nurses in the war, right?
I didn't see one. I saw
Yeah,
all young men.
a few clips, and they were mostly like when most of the crowd. So it was the far behind the crowd. There will be like one or two women among still mostly men. But anyways, like the one accusation that's been going around is that the Moroccan government has found many of these guys. They just released them from prison, basically. And then they're from those accusations, one of those clips that the people are using to kind of, not confirm it, but to kind of indicate it's kind of perhaps in that direction is one of the dude that came over and asked like, well, why are you here? Well, we had a problem with the government because he had killed someone. Right. So that's like, yeah, okay. Yeah. I would also be a little bit worried, right? Like if I was Spanish, but yeah, that was,
Well, there was a lot of clips of the Moroccan police. I assume they were police or some sort of law enforcement. They were actually pulling up to the border in these big trucks and vans and stuff, and they'd be opening the doors and letting people out and letting them go. So
and they were packed.
Yeah, they
like,
were packed.
Everyone was standing. It was like a never-ending flood, it seemed, because they were standing there, so they were able to pack them like max. It was, and you cannot do that unless it's a short distance, right? Like you have it prepped for that. Otherwise, you have generally going to have a bunch of people dead in there from heat exhaustion and all the other stuff. So, yeah, I mean that one is like, it's hard to kind of say this is like you can't really say anything else. I mean, it's.
I think the Moroccans are definitely complicit in it. Based on the footage, you can't draw any other conclusion. They were literally shoveling them across the border and giving them a ride there. But the real question then becomes who and why are they doing it, and who else is involved, whether it be the U.S. or Israel. Let me just pull up this Massey tweet. So while you guys were talking, I pulled it up. This is the tweet I was talking about. And he's basically saying, don't fall for the fake GOP outrage. 2 weeks ago, the House passed a bill that green-lighted the transfer of Spanish territory to Morocco. Every Republican except me voted for it, and now they are acting shocked at the invasion. And he highlighted here, the committee notes that the Spanish administrated cities of Ceuta, which is my new favorite word, and Melilla are located in the Moroccan territory and remain subject to Morocco's long-standing claim. So it's right there. You know, they're saying, yeah, this is Moroccan territory. This was just 2 weeks ago. That can't be by coincidence.
Interesting. Yes, that
Yeah,
is
well,
very
Trump
interesting.
has been
And it
pretty
was
angry at
with,
Spain lately, and
yeah,
also,
that's
you know, it's pretty interesting. It's funny to see, you know, like the Republican senators and congressmen, you know, going all third worldist and, you know, defending Morocco's right to, you know, take back colonial enclaves of Spain. It's hilarious, but nonetheless, it just goes to show the ideological, um, you know, the irrelevance of ideology in geopolitical situations. The you know, if Spain can strengthen its ties with Algeria and become a provider of energy to Europe, this would kind of reverse a lot of you know, collective suicide that the European Union has been doing.
Yep.
And something interesting that also happened recent, you know, with a massive crash of the Japanese currency,
Mm-hmm.
that Japan sold off a bunch of its U.S. Treasury bonds, but also the U.S. also bought a bunch of yen with the euro. I don't know if you talked about this before, but with
No,
selling
we were,
European bonds,
yeah, we were just getting
right?
into it before you guys joined to talk about basically the petrodollar collapse and the ongoing decline of it. But yeah, we can get into that too for sure, because I do have
Well,
some
the
stuff
thing
on
is that
that.
they basically threw Europe under the bus.
Totally threw them under the bus. And this is what you're talking about right here. This was last week on Friday. As you can see, what happened was, so a bit of background on Japan. Japan's economy is completely in the shitter. And
Basket
now,
case.
total basket case. And the reason is their the yen is depreciated to points not to a point not seen since like 1986. And the problem with an economy like Japan is they import everything. Like they don't produce any. They manufacture lots of stuff, but all the inputs are all imported, whether it be oil and gas, whether it be, you know, intermediate goods
Iron,
that go in everything.
copper,
There's not a
chips.
thing in
Yeah.
Japan. So the problem is now, as inflation's going up in the country, everything there is more expensive, and Japan is just not competitive on the world stage in anything anymore. And like I said, once you get up over 160, that's kind of like the panic level in Japan. And it's been over 160 now for quite a while. And it's been hovering around 160 since really the beginning of the year. So the intervention that you talked about, what Japan has been doing is they've been quietly selling off U.S. treasuries in order to buy yen, to prop
Yeah.
up the yen. And they've done that several times this year alone. And these are big ticket dollars, like you're talking 60, 70, 80 billion dollars a pop. So Japan's rainy day fund of US treasuries keeps declining. So they, from what I understand and what I've read, they said we're going to do another intervention to Scott Besson. And when he found out the amount that they were selling off, he said, no, you can't do that, because that's going to cripple us. So what we'll do is we'll jointly intervene. And so Japan sold off, I think, $66 billion worth of USD instead to buy the yen. And the US, I think the number quoted was 50 billion. And they
Yeah, I
sold
heard
off
50.
Was it 50? Yeah, 50 billion in euro to buy yen as well. So the duplicating factor, you've got whatever that is, $110 billion or whatever, being dumped directly into yen. And that's why you see this sharp decline here on Friday. It went down to nothing. But like other interventions, it's not going to last. It's basically the Japanese government and Scott Bessent buying time because they don't have a whole lot of tools in their toolbox anymore. If the if the Bank of Japan raises rates, so really they can only do two things. Number one, they can raise the interest rates in Japan, which makes their borrowing costs even higher. Or number two, they can dump treasuries in order to buy back the yen. Or they can do a combination of both, right?
Yeah,
The
can
problem
I
now,
yeah,
Yeah.
okay, I finish. I just want to chime in on the part
well,
there.
the problem now is interest rate monetary policy doesn't seem to have the effect that it once did, because even with an intervention like this, people are still going to demand higher rates. And let me just show you what I'm talking about. These are the current USD rates. And the ones that we should be concerned about are these two right here, the 10-year bond and the 30-year bond. The 30-year bond has been over 5% for quite a while now. The longest it's been over 5% since, I think, the COVID pandemic. And your 10-year bond is important because all borrowing rates are based on the 10-year bond. So this bond at 4.74% becomes a real problem because, well, your interest rate here of 4.74%, that's a lot of money that you've got to pay in interest, number one. And number two, with an inflation rate of 3.8%, the delta between the bond and the inflation rate, no one's gonna buy US treasuries. And that's what you're starting to see in Japan. They're bringing their money back to Japan because they're looking at it and saying, well, if the value of the US dollar is dropping by 3-4% every year, and we're only going to get 4%, 4.5% on our investment, we're better off to invest in Japanese bonds where we don't have the currency risk, right? The exchange rate risk. So a lot of countries, Japan is the biggest one, they're pulling back on buying treasuries. And that's what I was saying earlier. No central banks are buying these bonds, and the ones that are, or if they are, they're demanding higher and higher yields. And those higher and higher yields, ultimately, they amount to higher interest rates for the US government. So once you get to the point where effectively you're issuing bonds to service your debt, you got big problems. So I'll just leave it there. Go ahead.
I gotta go, but I'm looking forward to the conversation. Bye, guys.
Bye, David.
Cheers.
See you, Bridget. Yeah, one thing that to keip in mind that we were talking about earlier.
Hold on,
is
Gabriel.
this issue of
Gabriel. Hold on. I took a turn here with Nunya. I'm not sure if maybe I missed it, Nunya, but it's the incentive structure that Japan had that made this go for as long as it did. It's called generally the carry trade, and this is where Japan was issuing its. That's why it was one of those weird countries that had either close to zero or minus negative interest rates, because the way that it did it was that it kind of just shuffled over it did a weird twist where what it did was that it issued interest-free loans that could be used to buy U.S. equities, and so they
Yes.
bought U.S. dollars to, among other, buy U.S. Treasury bonds. But it's not only bonds; it's significantly more than the 50-60 billion. The whole stock market got a heavy crash on it because one of the most liquid things that were available via all that carry trade was U.S. equities and stocks, ETFs, and what have you, including index funds, which correlates with why the Nasdaq had one of its really heavy hits. The Kospi was tied to that one too, and like there's more to all of them which have been mentioned, but all of these are actually tied together to that carry trade with Japan. And the reason they have not increased the interest rate is because if they increase the interest rate, it will eat on the margins of returns that they get on the investments of equities. So that's why it had this perverse incentive structure that had them have interest-free loans, invest them in U.S. equity markets, which props up the dollar, and then they get the yields on returns, and that's kind of how really translates as interest. But in that process, the yen depreciates because typically one of the ways to combat inflation, for example, but also strengthen your currency is with interest rates. So having kind of deprived themselves of that ability, it kind of makes it more like it's not impossible. It's just a whole lot more challenging for them to prevent a consistent depreciation of the Japanese yen, which, like you alluded to, it affects everything because they're so heavily import dependent. But it comes like to a sweet spot where, like, okay, now the yen is so weak that our imports are in any event going to get to having a macro problem, so we need to make a course correction. And I believe the last time they did it was somewhere, I think you said the late 80s, I think it was the early 90s, they made this kind of monetary intervention where they're kind of just gobbling it up all back again in the manner that they did. And this is basically so, but it doesn't have to be permanent, like, and it doesn't have to be something that goes out completely. This 1% that Japan increased interest with, it's like nothing for most other countries because they're usually up to like 3, 4, 5 at this point. Russia has like 15, right? But for Japan, because of it has this carry trade where it makes return on having no interest, it just it means that it has to dump its exposure on the US dollar. So that's going to de-dollarize or like lower the value of the dollar, but it does not necessarily end the petrodollar system. It just has just like with the stock market having a course correction, the Japanese can resume, maybe not in whole, but in part, like, or maybe in whole. They can resume in whole actually, but they just need to have a breather. But this doesn't necessarily end it because Teddy was mentioning this earlier, like why de-dollarization doesn't necessarily mean like de-dollarization, the dollar devaluing. So Teddy pointed out the correct factor here. When the dollar is devaluing, all other countries devalue, precisely because the depth relations will mean that if they don't devalue, they will be the debts they have paid for will be worth less, or vice versa in investments and so forth. They need to kind of keep it on the level with the dollar that fits them. And the main reason for this is because the US is a reserve currency. And here's the thing, right? Why a good reason why the US dollar as a reserve currency is not necessarily, like, we will see maybe less use of it. But keep in mind, China has no interest in making their own reserve currency. Whatever attempt they make, they try to make in a very detached, tangential way that is not directly tied to their own. For if it does, they will face the same problems as the Americans did. Namely, their currency would appreciate, which will tank their export market, and it's heavily industrial, right? And they are having a lot of... remember we talked last time about the SPR? Here's another interesting thing I came across. The depression of oil prices, one of the reasons it has not skyrocketed as much as is not the SPR being drained across the West is a reason, but it's not the most significant one. It seems that the most significant one is actually demand destruction in China, which had already started for quite a while before, but precisely because they had done so prior to the conflict, they just managed to jack it up even more. And what they're now doing, right? They're trading it. So how are they trading it? They're using their excess of US dollars to buy gold. So they're one of the biggest buyers of gold now because now it's at the lowest price. One of the reasons is because Turkey sold off to get US dollars in order to buy petrol, right? So like that's just not just only Turkey, but it's a very notable one. And then while most of the other countries in the West, in particular, have been draining the strategic petroleum reserves to buffer mostly internally, or because they actually are import dependent. Either way, the same reason as Turkey selling off their dollar, they drain their SPR. But China, having already conducted demand destruction for quite a while, they just decide to accelerate facets of it because they saw that this thing with Iran is not going to end anytime soon, and they are going to be peculiarly hard hit by it. So instead of then trying to artificially maintain what they had anyways they intended to plan to break down, they just they break it down earlier, and then instead they buy up the oil when the lulls are with the ceasefires and the oil prices go down. They buy it to fill their own strategic petroleum reserves, and insofar as demand requires it and the oil prices are high, they don't alter too much with the imports. They simply drain out their SPR, which leads me to suggest to think that because one thing you're noticing is that they are then operating with the oil as a trading commodity, not as the integral part of the industrial economy that they have as much. It still is, of course, but not as much as before.
Sure.
And the second thing, when you look at it from that angle, the oil prices will affect China's economy either way. They need to keep it low because they also import oil. So whether they have demand destruction or not, it is in China's interest to maintain it. So I strongly suspect that one of the things that China is planning or doing right now is not only trying to kind of just try to maintain a cool for an uncertain period of time, because they probably may not know for sure how that maybe they think this might last for years, which it actually may. And or they are just waiting for the West to have their strategic petroleum reserves depleted to critical levels, because when that happens, invariably then the real supply and demands will be hitting in, prices will go up, and that will hurt China so much so that what they will do instead is to release their strategic petroleum reserve, cushion the damage it will do to their industry, and make a killing on the oil sales, which they bought generally when there were lulls earlier or whatever. And when all things fail from that, they can then sell the gold that had been accumulating that is on a low price, which may very well be skyrocketing here. Like if this goes for like 1, 2 years, 3 years, like we don't know for sure. But by like some estimates or like 2027, it could be anything from $10,000 to $30,000, right? So that's a heavy degree of leveraging if you're operating with, and this is not even long-term planning, right? This is very interesting. They're operating exactly as the American financial architecture basically wants them to. And this maintains and strengthens the dollar, right? Because they are basically then, they will be circulating the dollars. As long as the Chinese circulate the dollars and don't want to take the position as a reserve currency themselves, they are going to be happily using the Americans as service, because that's really what a dollar is to them. They don't need the power in that sense, because and insofar as they can piggyback on the dollar, they will naturally fill in what the dollar had to kind of give up because it became the reserve currency, right? So that's kind of where I kind of look at it. That you're kind of, yeah. I think I talked like on a way over here. So where did we start here? We're talking about the yen, yeah.
No, excellent points, particularly on China, because I think that their gold reserves are way higher than anybody really knows about, because they've been buying up gold for a long time now. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that
and they're also producing golds, and they don't need to disclose those numbers, and they really don't
Sure.
need to disclose anything. The thing about what Coping was saying of China's own circulation of dollar, that's also a form of it's a contestation to the American bond market. So it doesn't necessarily support the dollar as a reserve currency. It uses its own dollar reserves as an alternate, or even as a competition to the bond market of the U.S. Treasuries. So it's a way of maintaining a circulation that is parallel to the dollar system, it
No,
will
it's actually both.
trickle-
It's actually both because they're not only avoiding having their currency appreciate by having the Americans have the reserve currency, but all the dollars that they're taking in, precisely because the dollar is the reserve currency, they accumulate. Unlike many other countries, they accumulate in excess. And what they have been like, so they have been selling off bond, but they invest in the U.S. bond and treasuries and everything. They're one of the biggest ones. And when they might be toning down a bit, but generally when but it's like they will have no problems
They have been
having the use of.
systemically
They will be
reducing
one of them if you think about
their
it.
purchase
If you
of
think
U.S.
about it like
Treasury
this,
bonds.
but hold on,
But they
Dave, if you think
still
about
get
it like this,
they still
if you
get
think about it
paid
like this,
in
they
dollars.
have the most
They still
influence.
get paid in dollars for a
Mm.
bunch of their exports, and therefore they still have a surplus of dollars, in spite not being active buyers, but actually reducing their reserve of U.S. Treasury. So
No, it
yes,
enables them to go like the Americans.
because they are
Listen, Gabriel,
still
you're missing. Wait,
liquidating
wait, wait.
their
Gabriel,
hey, you
you hear me?
dude, take it easy. Take
Wait,
it
wait.
easy. No, man.
You missed
No,
the,
no,
you missed
do
the
it.
important point here.
You keep on going on and on and on. Just take a break. Anyways, the point is that there is an issue going on with China's own parallel dollar economy that does affect negatively the bond market in the United States. And you know, earlier you guys were talking with Bridget about the causes of inflation, but it's not a single cause issue. It's a thing that can compound. And in the case of the printing of money and the lack of absorption from the rest of the world by the demand for dollars. On top of that, you also have the increase of cost because of the fuel market and all of this inflationary pressures. So it's a compounding effect that's going on. And yeah, countries do
No doubt.
need to have a lower currency than the US dollar as for their reserves of US dollars to continue to have value. If the dollar dips in value below the rate of return, the interest rate, then it no longer makes sense. And that's one of the reasons why the gold has been appreciating so much lately in the past few years. It's because it comes to inflation of the dollar, and the compounding causes of the inflation of the dollar comes to a point in which the return on investment is no longer profitable. And the issue with the situation in the Middle East precisely is that, in spite of the Americans usually tend to think that it doesn't affect them, that the destruction that's happening on the world economy doesn't affect them necessarily. The thing is that the reason why we have this intermittent war, in which it's like the weekend war, right? Every Friday it escalates, and every Monday it de-escalates, every Sunday it de-escalates.
Literally weekend warriors. Literally weekend warriors.
Unbelievable. And the issue with that is precisely that the wreckage to the global economy cannot the effect that wrecking the world economy has on the United States cannot be avoided. And everything that's being done is trying to mitigate the results, the catastrophic results that it has on the American economy. First and foremost, because of the compounding pressure of the increase of fuel price on the American consumption market, which is the main driver of the American economy. And also because of the massacre that it's having on its allies' economies. It's having a tremendous impact on all the reserve currency holders, and then they have to sell the reserve currency. So it's almost like, in spite of all the coping that has been around on the subject, with all the 60 chess, the 10D chess, it's almost like America is doing this Iran conflict thingy against its interest. Almost. But who knows?
You broke up. You broke up. The U.S. is doing the Iran conflict because...
Oh, that it's almost like this issue of the Iran conflict, the weekend wars, is against American interests. It's harming American interests overall.
Well, I'm not going to dispute that necessarily, but the thing is that all that you mentioned, from my vantage, not all of it necessarily, but most of it, it kind of just furthers substantiates from my view why the Chinese are likely to step in, because they have so much utility of the dollar. Like the thing is that while yes, they are susceptible to American pressure, that they are also able to pressure the Americans. Like they can threaten to lock off as well. So, and they are able to do so much better than any other country on the planet. Right? There's no one else that can match the United States like China can, on these matters as well. And it's worth noting, like their ability to have so much of their soft power projection around the world is precisely because they have been operating within the dollar system, and they are using often dollars. For example, in their loan programs, like did you know that they're one of the biggest contributors within the IMF, for example? Right? They're also one of they are the biggest one in the I forgot the name, I think it was African Development Bank or something. They also have Russia involved in it, but the thing is here, they're doing it both with financial lending. They will often be using dollars, but then when they implement their industries, like we have seen they do, like they're being criticized for it, and give it what it is, but the way that they're operating is that they will be doing pretty much like the West, using Western currencies, but when they bring their industries and their workers to do the infra, because they do it themselves fully, and what they do then is that they compel their workers to be operating only within the renminbi, their internal currency, and to use only materials and everything from their own economy, because what they're doing effectively is offloading pressure from their industrial production, because all the industrial dominance they have acquired requires a heavy amount of leveraging, making them susceptible to macroeconomic global changes. So when they need to adjust in order to avoid overheating internally so that companies pop over, they offload it through. So they use basically as much dollars as they can over at the US market for the yields, right? The return on the yields on US debt. They love getting the yields insofar as that Ponzi scheme hold. And precisely because they benefit from that Ponzi scheme, they are likely to be stepping in, including when the SPR runs out. Their reserves they're building up now, they're probably going to try to capitalize it like good capitalists. Gabriel, you're muted. Oh, by the way, Nunya, I think you need to unpin the comment, because it doesn't it removes the names on the screen.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Let me try to figure that out.
But yeah, Gabriel, are you unmuted?
There we go.
No, you're still muted.
Oh yeah, it's okay. I was saying something else. The one thing that I see that might be either like a reason for this whole thing, the whole like economic shock that the conflicts are generating, which it's been consecutive, right? So you have the Russian conflict, which was a economic shock. Before that, you had COVID, which is also a form of like warfare if you look at it in a holistic manner. That was a massive shock to the economy, and then you have this Middle Eastern crisis, consecutive crises, which are continuing to shock the economy. There might be some purpose of wrecking the global economy as for maintaining a relative advantage, but that's one possibility. The other possibility is that it's not actually a purpose, but it's like a compensation. So the original plan is to bring out these conflicts, these shocks to the world economy, and then gain some profit from that. The other possibility is that the intended purpose was something else, and then you have the compensation, which is to like sort of lean on the weak links of the chain, or the available allies and so you weaken them, but you maintain your own relative position. So that's one impression that I'm getting. Like it's not necessarily the purpose of these shocks, but it's more of like a compensation reaction, compensatory reaction. Anyway, the point is that Europe is clearly being fucked. Asia has been severe. Like everything that they say damages China, it actually damages Japan and South Korea and Philippines, Malaysia, etc. more than China. So it's damaging the American sphere of influence, just like the damage on Europe harms the American sphere of influence. There might be a calculation there as to say we reduce their overall influence and power, but we keep a higher level of loyalty to which we can, dispose of them even further. Or it's just a unfortunate consequence. So the Europeans and the Asians are being sacrificed for this sort of Cold War, the second Cold War. The thing I consider interesting right now is the inclusion of Spain in the picture, because Spain could be an alternate supplier of Europe for energy that isn't Russian or American. However, Spain is an incredibly dangerous nation. Like Spain has been the buffoon, the doormat of Europe for several decades now, a couple of centuries if you look a bit further. However, Spain has a massive potential influence. They could they could use, if they use their soft power. They have a like a civilization behind them. Like it's the hidden civilization, because you have like the Chinese, the Russian, sort of Muslim kind of, or Iranian, and the Anglo-Saxon empires or civilizations, Germanic civilization. And then there's a hidden civilization, which is the Spanish, which has it's like the third most spoken language in the world. So if they could dispose of that influence, if they could use that influence, they could become a massive player. And it's been a priority for the German-centered or led Europe
Am I getting you right, Gabriel? You're coming with a bunch of pro-Spanish imperial propaganda, where you're asking them to just bring back the influence on their former Spanish holdings and use that soft power to. I know you said they're white colonizers. I forgot. I'm in the room with just white colonizers here. I forgot. Oh, sorry.
No, it was the Habsburg bunch. After that, the Europeans said, "No, we can't have these guys doing anything for us anymore. We can't do it."
Well, it makes sense, and they but I'm not making a value judgment. I'm not saying it's a positive or negative thing. I'm saying
I'm joking. I'm joking.
But yeah. The cross of Borgoña is going to fly again eventually.
Well, did we want to move on to, I'm happy to keep talking about Spain, but did we want to move on to Iran? One thing I did want to point out, I agree with your comments about China. The other benefit of all this to China is their own bonds too. Like, it shouldn't be a shock to anybody. Every time China rolls out their, quote, panda bonds, they are way oversold. They can't issue them fast enough. And you ask yourself, why is that? Why is the world flocking to panda bonds at 2% when they could get American bonds at, the 4.7% or whatever that I put up? And the reason is risk. Nobody sees a risk in investing in China anymore. Remember, 20 years ago, that was a big thing. Like, oh, you can't invest in China. These are communists. These are, it's a fledgling economy. Anything that, right? Nowadays, people are like, oh yeah, I'd rather invest my money in a panda bond at 2% than I would a U.S. Treasury at 4.7. So that's a big thing when you think about it. And the reason is inflation and the currency risk associated with it. People don't see any sort of currency risk with the panda bonds vis-a-vis US treasuries. So you're just going to see continued de-dollarization, and Mr. Bessent's going to have a big problem going around and trying to sell the United States as a place to invest. And we're seeing that now.
How
You
do
know,
you view that? Like, because I'm kind of like, given that they have made such big initiatives for the reindustrialization, reshoring, and all that kind of stuff. As far as I can tell, like, I'm sure there's a lot of hidden skeletons brewing up and growing larger, and zombies and all that kind of stuff. But as far as I can tell, for the time being, they're moving on. Now, I know there's some big risks that we end up with just a slew of half-finished infrastructure projects and stuff like that. But setting that aside, nonetheless, like the Trump said himself that he wanted to devalue the dollar, which isn't, to be clear, it doesn't necessarily mean to de-dollarize, because I mean it's sort of like if you think about gold. Let's say gold rich. I mean, just gold now at like $4,000, right? Can you use a piece of gold? Like, how are you going to pay your groceries? Are you going to like pay off a sliver and cut, like, shave off a sliver and cut this? Like, you cannot. It becomes impractical, right? So like the dollar is still gonna, like, the issue is like if it has a liquidity meltdown completely, everything collapses very quickly, then of course, but that will be catastrophic for everyone, which is precisely like, even though China is beholden to the United States, again, like my main point here is that China has a lot of influence, and I don't really see why they would want the dollar to go away, because they benefit more they seem to benefit a whole lot more from the US financial architecture and the dollar being around. I mean, there are aspects of the architecture they would, of course, like to tweak more to their own likings, but the dollar itself, the reserve currency aspect of it, I can only see them being they're so tied into it, and I don't see them having any counter incentives that are strong enough to, like, that makes sense for them to do so, unless they want to make a strong statement. But like, especially if you look at now in the as it is currently, with the demand destruction that they had to do anyways, and they have a lot of internal bubbles with the real estate market that they need to correct, which is also, these things are correlated. And when you have this Iran conflict topping it on top, it's very clear that China cannot be viewing with growth projection at the moment. Like, they have to kind of have a coup, basically, or just continue demand destruction further, right? So for them then, to make a strong statement, okay, now we're just going to sever from the dollar. Well, I don't think it will have the same positive effect as it had for Russia in the beginning. For Russia, remember, that helped them to consolidate their political and corporative authorities, right? And it made them more strategic in a sense. Whereas the Chinese, they are already in place. Don't forget, they have a pretty damn good control over their corporations.
sure.
So if they suddenly get cut off like that, right, they don't have as much of the political benefits internally, like, because they are the industrial dominance, right? The powerhouse itself, right? The Russia, for example, needed to actually bring back home, like the Americans are trying to do, right? So I think we're going to be seeing a pretty hard recession, like a likely harder one we have seen. But in that process, because of the political incentives, unless there is some like electoral, like internal stuff with the Americans, which cause them to put a wrench into it, or like what, sabotage it, then what we might see is that the dollar is devalued. The Americans become more of an export economy themselves, which will facilitate and because one of the reasons for the demand destruction, while there are many in China, part of them are precisely because of the initiatives the Americans have taken. And this ties, actually, just to not go too away from Iran, this ties also to Iran. And I think I mentioned it here in the form of copper and aluminum, right? We saw aluminum prices skyrocket when Iran hit the aluminum facilities around the Gulf state, right? But that one is actually important in the long run as well, because Iran has about 5 to 7% of the global output of copper, depending on the estimate. And the important thing to note here is that the infrastructure projects that the Americans are relying on is something that both them and the Chinese have an interest at keeping copper prices low, So currently, the Chinese have been managing to get a lot of copper on sanctioned discount from the Islamic Republic. But if the Islamic Republic were to, let's say, open up the markets more in a free matter way, the Chinese will just take a minor buff of it, and then it will be a slight gain for the Americans. But it will be important for this reindustrialization, because if, say, copper prices skyrocket, the demand for aluminum will be even higher, and they will skyrocket. And the thing with, well, aluminum is not a minor story, so it's actually relatively quick to kind of get production. It's more of a manufacturing and energy. Copper is a real supply constraint that take about a decade or so to ameliorate. And that's exactly why Iran is important. Not because it has like the vastest copper reserves like Chile, for example. Chile is by far the most important. But and also mining permits in the United States, this will be within 5 years, might be mining reforms, might be permit reforms they have, might change this a bit too. But regardless, like China is by far the biggest consumer of copper across the world. So them conducting demand destruction as well is helping suppressing the copper prices to the benefit of their ongoing industries and to the benefit of the Americans' reindustrialization. And Iran's importance is because they have running mines. It's not going to be a decade you have to wait before the mine can permits and exploration, all these things. Like, because the things, even if you know about a high grade reserves are rare. But even if you know about them, it takes about 10 to 20 years before you have any significant output. In Iran, you have very significant mines already readily available. So there might be like some mutual corrections here, because I don't think the Chinese are like I think they're willing to throw the Islamic Republic under the bus insofar as they can maintain the most beneficial outcomes from it as well. And as far as I can tell, except for the oil, when it comes to the copper and aluminum and the other stuff, they generally have it's not that big of a loss for them. It's mostly and it's more to do with the renminbi as well, so that they're able to kind of offload and circulate their own economy, like the Americans are doing with the dollar. They're doing it in minor ways over to, or lesser ways, I should say, not minor, but lesser ways over to Iran. So I think like there are too many interests that are tied into the Islamic Republic that whether the Islamic Republic stays or go down, the Americans and the China, like, I think it will be a bigger win for the Americans only if they manage to get Iran under their sphere of influence. But they are making several mistakes with arming separatists and stuff like that. Like, if there's one thing, like, the anti-regime people they're like, you are as much of an enemy. Like, if there's one thing that the anti-regime can agree with the pro-regime, is that the territorial integrity of Iran is not up for negotiation. Any form of separatism, like Kurdish, Baluch, it does not matter, right? You're an even worse enemy, right? So when the Americans are doing that, they are less likely than to have Iran come over to their sphere of influence like it was under the Shah, and more to have it just be kind of a basket case where maybe some benefits. So probably the oil, because in the south, easier to seize. But basically, we're then looking at the fragmentation of Iran.
But you see, that's a dilemma. That's an unsolvable dilemma, because Iran was under the British control under the old Shah. Then it was under American control under the most recent Shah. And the thing is that Iran as an entity, it has too much inherent or natural influence and power, both by resources, geography and culture and history. And so I think the Americans, just like the British in their own time, they've realized that, it's not a matter of having an Iranian like allied government or regime. The fact of its territorial expanse and its position, it's just too much of a danger. Like, you cannot integrate that country. It's like China. China was integrated, and that failed catastrophically for the States. The same thing would happen with Iran. If it gets integrated into the American-led global system, it would be a destabilizing force, because it would start to have too much preponderance. It has to be isolated, contained, or broken apart.
But wait, would Iran be less easy for the or more difficult for the Americans to contain if they have them integrated? Because currently Iran is so severed from sanctioned so much that the cost of getting severed further. That's why they're able to absorb and willing to absorb this much damage, right? They've already come so much internal oligopoly and monopolization of their industry that the ones in power there, they frankly don't give a shit in many cases. So if they now get tied, if they get replaced and reintegrated, because they become, then imagine they become a part of the global elite, right? So that means that they have a dependency, and thus you can influence them. So I'm not so sure about that. Like I would say, like right now, that when you have like an obstinate Islamic Republic compared to something that you can control it more, because look what the Islamic Republic is willing to do: fire missiles all over the place. If you have someone who's compliant, you don't have to do it. You can shut them down like Norway. You don't need to do shit with Norway militarily. We have like 40% or something like that of our sovereign wealth fund denominated in dollars. If the Americans did to us what they did to the Russians, we wouldn't last a week, right? And
of course,
that's where I'm kind of like.
But the same thing would happen with Iran. The same, like the thing. It's not because Norway has an ideological disposition to put their dollars, their reserve fund in dollars. It's that the geographic position of Norway, up there in the middle of Norway, in the middle of nowhere, at the edge of the Arctic. It's not a threat. It would never be a threat. It would never be the threat that Iran is and would be under the Shah or whoever. And one of the reasons why the Shah was also overthrown was because he started getting uppity. And anyone in position of power, any oligarch, no matter how compliant with the West, if it's in the position of Iran, of leadership of Iran, he's going to start to get uppity because he's going to have the influence inherently. He's going to have the choke point. He's going to have the resources, the population. And so you can't, even if they're aligned for a decade or two, eventually they're going to get uppity again. And that's why you have all this process of like the Iranian revolution, the Islamic revolution. It didn't appear out of the blue. It got into power because there were circumstances that allowed for it to happen, and one of those circumstances was punishing the Shah for getting uppity, and start to oppose Israel and start to wanting to nationalize its industry. And the Shah was dumb because he thought that he had the support of the people, and he didn't, and so he got overthrown. But the revolution got out of hand. The Islamics were gonna help it with the revolution and then go retire to the Ayatollah was going to retire into the mountains and abandon political life, and they didn't. So they snatched the revolution. My point is that whoever is in power in Iran, as it currently stands, and as it standed 100 years ago, is going to have too much power to be able to control effectively, and that's going to make it a liability, and that's why it has to be breaking apart. There's no way for Iran to be integrated into the system without being like Baluchistan and Kurdistan and all of these separate little balkanized nationlets, because that's what the Americans can handle.
Okay, let me presuppose that you are because you are making valid points if you're looking in the long term and as a matter of intention, right? But I also think that intentions very much are also often dictated in the short term. And, shorter term planning to me suggests that one of the more important things for the Americans is to wrestle off the Islamic Republic from China, just like they did with Venezuela. Because, and also, I think it's like, if you think about it like this, when Venezuela getting their sanctioned discounted oil back into the market so that the Chinese will not, that hurts Chinese margins. If Islamic Republic falls or otherwise comply, it doesn't have to fall. It just need to comply to sufficiently so that the Chinese would have to buy the oil at market price. Now think about what happens if the Ukraine war resolves. Whatever way it resolves, the Russian oil no longer is sold to the Chinese on a discount. The cumulative effect will be, because this is something that the Chinese are very dependent on in order to be able to maintain their It's not crucial, but it is very important for them to be able to maintain their industrial dominance. So for the Americans to, if you think of it like this, if the Americans are, they're now taking Venezuela, now they take Iran out of the sphere from a, like, even if they're not taking, now they're disrupting, right? But if they're able to take them out in the matter that the Chinese will have to, pay with by a free market, and then the Ukraine war ends, the Americans will end up with significantly more leverage against the Chinese in order to have them comply to, how they want them to comply to the Americans' architecture. Because the thing is right now is that the Chinese are trying to, like, they don't want to leave it or anything. They just want to adapt like their own little corner, and they already have a lot of a special corner. Like we all know, like the arrangements that they make with the United States, for example, for having industries and businesses over, entirely different from conditions from what the other countries would even try to get from the Western or the Americans, right? So it's yeah, like I said, like the Chinese, I think they're pretty okay with the dollar gives the U.S. a lot of power, but it also gives them a whole lot of liability. And like it's obvious here, like the Iran is a very good case. Think about it like this: they don't even need the oil. The Americans don't really need the oil, but because their economy is so intertwined globally with the reserve currency, right? They have to give a shit, and it's costly for them. It hits them back home, right? And why would the Chinese want to have that liability when they can just offload it to the Americans? Right.
Well, it's not that you want that liability. It's an issue of relative power. It's a zero-sum game. Like insofar as there's a hegemonic dominance over the world economy, there's even greater liability than being in charge. Now, I don't believe that the architecture that exists of like global hegemony is, a total hegemony. It's not. There's a lot of wiggle room, and it's not like the only roadmap to a global financial system. So there is potential for other arrangements of global finance. The thing is that if you need, if China is in the position, like maybe they are imperialists and they want to dominate the world and stuff like that, but then there's the other option that the pursuit of power and influence is a matter of survival, not necessarily a matter of world domination. There is a possibility that if you don't have like sufficient level of autonomy, defense capability, influence, power, then you'll get crushed. You will be crushed, and you will be harvested, like the 100 years of humiliation. And so, from that perspective,
geopolitics in a nutshell.
You might not want, from that perspective, you might not want to go into the American shoes, so to speak, but yes, to snatch enough power and accumulate enough influence as to not be able to be stomped on, as to, and that's where you get to like the Thucydides trap and these ideas where it's inevitable for great powers to clash, because if I don't have the power to smash him, then he's gonna smash me, and that's inevitability.
Well, I mean, to your point there, if you think about it, like how like Wyatt has pointed out this, that the neighbors of China, and this makes sense, right? Like let's put it like this: why do you think the Americans managed to get so many arrangements with so many countries, and the assortment of countries? Like there is an exception here with Europe, for example, having Germany firmly under their control. And the reason Germany and France, for that matter, both of them are quite irrelevant in what I'm about to say, is that they are the geographically natural regional hegemons, right? Now, generally, the Americans, while they will be, of course, trying to get them as well, in the case of an actual regional hegemon able to somewhat contest. So what will be in Southeast Asia, that is no doubt China, right? And they need to gain full control within their sphere of influence. And they have a different way of going with their policies that so like one of the reasons most of the countries around them have there's a multifaceted, of course, because it depends on which country, which relation, whatnot. But on the common denominator is that they find themselves. China tries to impose policies on them that invariably leads to such a high degree of trade deficiency that if they have no other alternatives, they become debt dependent. So this is a serious concern for Russia at the moment, right? Currently, they're selling oil at a discount, and this helps them go on. But at the same time, they're importing quite a lot from China, and this is the unequal exchange like you have with the colonies generally. I buy raw materials from you, generally at a discount, and then you buy manufactured goods from me, maybe often at a higher price, especially since you're sanctioned, right? So what is invariably the case for Russia as their sovereign wealth fund dries up? The ripple effect of having the private sector hollowed out, because that's unavoidable with the interest rates that they're operating by, right? And they cannot go on in perpetuity without consequences. So at some point, they might find themselves compelled, in order to get financially propped up by China. So they will get debt issuance, like they can't get IMF loans, but they will get Chinese loans, and these loans are on whatever returns, because of course the Chinese want to return on their interest, where the money is used to buy Chinese goods anyways, right? So it's a like you said, it's a matter of power, but and survivability. But it's not like only defense; it's also defense and offense. You kind of have to take your surrounding powers too, in a sense. And Russia peculiarly is a regional hegemon in my side of the world, right? We are the neighbor of Russia. So if it's not the Germans or the French and British, it's going to be Russia, right? That's the big brother in Scandinavia is Sweden, but because of the accumulated size being so small, even united, we have a strong say if we are one formal entity, sort of like NATO but Scandinavian, right? But but we are nonetheless we cannot compare. Like it's only then we have parity with one of the great powers and one of the great powers alone. But if one of, like, say, Germany or France, or I was maybe Britain, also Britain, because for Norway, Britain, because of the maritime issue. But if not, it's Russia, right? We will be for us, it will be Russia that is the greatest threat currently, if you follow the same line of power dynamics. So this is why Norway, for example, apart from many other reasons, but this is also one of the reasons Norway, and especially reinforced with Sweden and Finland joining NATO, right? Now, I used to see negatively at this because I don't have too positive perspective on NATO itself, but or its current configuration. But I'm kind of hoping like NATO might be weakened so much so that whether it maintains itself as a bigger umbrella that is useful, or just destroyed. To me, what matters is that we managed to get our little and its formal section. That we have a regional say on the matters. That is like we have our own little what is it called? It's sort of like there's a term for this when you have like a regional alliance of that sort of like NATO, but it's on a lesser scale. The Warsaw Pact was one of those, for example.
Yeah, make your own league, but that's sort of the logic of the current trend in world history, is that insofar as you have regional alliances and good relation with your neighbors, you can stand up to greater powers that are. By the way, Europe's glory days was before the technological development of the world. Once the technological development of the world started to, overflow the capacity of Europe to maintain its lead technologically, all the power they have left is legacy. Once America industrialized and Russia started to industrialize, Europe was obsolete automatically. And now that China started to industrialize, like all the other industrial powers start shaking, because like the logic of power in the prior centuries was completely different. The relative power has changed dramatically, and so right now, yeah, you have some bargaining power if you have a strong ties with neighbors that can actually complement your own, geographic resource and manpower situation. If not, then you're at the mercy of, whichever greater power has sway over your area. And in the case of South America, we're kind of fucked because there's like only one game in town, one player in town. In Eurasia, in the Eurasian landmass, it's different because you have these competing powers that do exist and can actually challenge each other, and you can get better bargains for your. And that's the whole thing. It's like, how can you bargain a better position if
Okay.
China has this massive like trade imbalance with all the nations which it trades with. Every nation should be afraid and try to avoid that because it's going to destroy their own industry. But to what extent does China offer a better deal than the current hegemon? That it becomes a dilemma in which, like, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm going to have a trade deficit, but if I have a trade surplus with the States, for example, then my financial economy is tied to the whims of the White House, and all my surplus has to go back to the States, like what happens with Japan and with South Korea, that all of their surplus, all of their immense trade deficit that they have with the United States just goes back to the United States, and nothing stays there, and their economies are basket cases. And so, and the same thing is happening with Europe. Their good relation with their big brother hegemon is wrecking their economies much worse than whatever Chinese influence harm.
Well, I'm going to be fair here. It's not entirely the fault of the Americans. The Soviet Union has a lot to. I mean, the EU has a lot to blame for it itself. But yes, go ahead.
It's like Gabriel said. It's kind of the history of the world, isn't it? Like, the Greek states would have been arguing about the very same things that we're talking about right now 3,000 years ago, because you had Athens, which was the big hegemon in the region, and all the little various Greek island states were vassals to them, and they were, paying Athens to defend them. Like, the cycle just is repeated throughout history. So if you're not one of those major states, which we all come from countries that aren't, you're kind of in that situation, one hegemon to another, are you not?
Well, yeah, pretty much. So I wanted to, what Gabriel said in the beginning, we're fucked because we only have one player in town. Well, that depends on how you view it. But you think that we have a plurality of players. Okay, we have never been very keen on having the Germans to be, for example, our hegemonic overlord, right? And most other countries in Europe have been pretty much against that too. And that is like Nunes said, this is usually the case because everyone, and so that's why you banned against. And sometimes the hegemon, the natural hegemon, defeats the federation or allies or whatever you want to call it. Now, in the case of Norway, just to give an example to like who is most fucked here, because our choice here is Germany, which is fucked, France, which is fucked, and both of them are simultaneously liabilities for us in a multitude of ways. Like we have a lot of economic issues precisely because we are not only already beholden to them, but because they are so dysfunctional, and our government just follows the line of dysfunctionality, right? But you take it then, okay, what are alternatives? Because historically speaking, like we would be like, even though like Britain, for example, the UK are usually like our frenemy. They are our natural rivals as maritime nations, but they are also our greatest security. They provide a security umbrella that enables our trade. Like that's historically what they have been. And they are also then subsequently one of the more meaningful counters to Sweden, which is a more mercantile. Like the reason Norway and Sweden seceded eventually was because Sweden tried to impose mercantilistic policies upon Norway, which fit Sweden better as the empire that they were. but not for Norway, which was as a maritime nation and pretty much only trade. So eventually that led up for I'm not going to go into that story, but now if you look at it now in modern days, right? The Germans, even if you wanted to, they're too messed up. The French, even if we wanted to, too messed up. The British, even if we wanted to, too messed up. And the Russians are, I understand that people may have favoritism towards the Russians, but they're also too dangerous to allow that level of control as well. So that's why I keep advocating for, like, we cannot rely on the other players. And this is, by the way, like, this is, I say I wanted the regional one. That's just me coping with what fantasy I like of the regional security alliance, or the Scandinavian one, whatever. But this is also why we are ultimately, like, whether we want to or not, because our government is currently rather relatively antagonistic towards the United States, and it's primarily this Trump derangement syndrome thingy that they're spinning all the time and acting upon it too. But nonetheless, they are utterly beholden to the United States because there are no other good alternatives when it boils down to it. So the Germans and the French as well, they're just moving away to the United States or China anyways, right? So we're just finding ourselves like, okay, what alternatives and counters do we have to Russia? They're moving away. And Russia has, their issue with there. But yeah, Anders, by the way, veldig fint å se deg igjen. That's a fellow Norwegian from the OG DPA crew. Let's see.
Can I take a stab at answering the question here?
Yes, please do.
No, I mean, the socialism, the Green Deal, all that, absolutely, that's the fault of Europe. But you go back to why that is, and I think, again, history repeats itself. Do you guys remember the peace dividend? I remember the peace dividend from the 1990s is, okay, the Soviet Union is defeated. We're no longer going to spend all of our money on weapons, and we're going to reinvest it in our people. And that was the European model, right? And, it was a good idea because that's the way hegemon always works. It always starts out as a partnership, right? It'll start out as a partnership, and I'll go back to Athens as a perfect example. They said to the various island states, okay, you guys, in terms of scale, we've got a better means of protecting you through our people and our technology. So, you can come under our umbrella. You guys don't have to maintain your armies. Just pay us money, pay us silver, send us silver to Athens, and we'll take care of you. Sound familiar? But over time, eventually what happens with every hegemon is it's never enough. It's always, we need more silver. We need more of this. We need more control over you guys, because basically what happens to those states, and in this case, it's Europe, they all atrophied to nothing. They deindustrialized their military base. They didn't produce weapons, or very few, token shit. And they basically, outsourced their military system to the Americans. And that worked for a while because, again, it always starts off as a partnership. But eventually the hegemon realizes these bunch of pussies can't do anything for themselves. We can start to, throw our weight around. And that's what you've been seeing the last 20 years or so, ever since the Iraq War, when a lot of these, European states said, no, this is not a war for us. Then it was then that, the Americans basically said, okay, we need to start putting more pressure on these guys. You start to see for calls for more NATO support, more funding, all of that other things. You guys need to change your laws that, benefit us more than they do you, and so on and so forth. The history of hegemon going back to, civilization probably followed the same model. So I think that's the answer to your question is, yes, the Europeans built all this, but they were still under the illusion that they were a partner and not a vassal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, can I add to that to that response to Anders there? Because like one thing that I think is very noteworthy is that the Americans and for that matter the Russians, even though they're pressed, they also have some of a backstop. They have themselves, and the Americans can do so too. Likewise, the Chinese. Chinese might be import dependent, especially on fuel, but it's not that hard for them to fill their own supply. The problem is that they will have to outbid. They cannot get a great deal on as great as a deal as they might get when things are otherwise. But what does Europe have, right? Europe has pretty much nothing. Their industries are going away. They're backwards in their technological developments, and now they're trying to take measures in order to kind of counter. Like so, what was it? They're going to try to disallow Visa and Mastercard to be used because it's American. It's part of that part, and then they're going to set up their own thing tied up to that monkey currency they call the euro, right? So it's they're going to what are we seeing then like 5 to 10 years down the line? Because that's kind of like that's kind of the thing where I see it for Norway, because I know like in Norway, sort of like Great Britain, of all the NATO members there, we have a particular strategic relevance to the Americans, and so there's a special relation that is in, like, the Americans have a special relation with the UK for many other reasons, but with Norway, for example, especially as it pertains to NATO, if you think about it like this, we are the entry points for controlling the continent. The entry point for the Americans that's first and foremost by sea. So if you have Britain and or Norway, which have some of the most substantial coastlines and the most defensible positions, then the UK itself being, at least used to be, quite influential. Norway is currently very important in relative to its size, but it's also because it's very servile. And that's why things going bad with the EU means by default bad for Norway, even though we are not technically a EU member. We basically get, like, our leadership are basically doing exactly what the EU is asking for, and then they're trying to do even more. They love to waste money. They love to send money out. Anyways, what is then the geopolitical situation for Norway is that, from my vantage, is that the EU, as long as it has this incentive structure that it goes by, that it has nothing going for it, and it is incapable of course correcting adequately. Like, I don't see it as suddenly it manages to do it. Like, I think it will make sudden policy moves that will be, and it will be far too late by the time they do it. So the case for Norway then is that we will most likely remain quite firmly under the sphere of American influence, because I think we're going to have like a pretty massive financial crisis. Like, this is kind of a cyclical thing, right? But this time, I think it's going to be hitting in a way where when things are recovering, it's in part recovering. This scenario is predicated on a very big if. If the Americans' reindustrialization go adequately ahead, then this crash will cushion for the Americans enough, because they have then the industries to start running things up in a different manner. We will see the multipolar world, but I don't see we'll see the dollar stop being used. What I will see for Europe, however, is that they're going to be enslaved to the financial architecture of the Americans and the industrial dominance of the Chinese. And then eventually, as things are resolved with Russia, well, I mean, that's perhaps the only one they actually want to have some more dependency on, because without the Russian oil and gas, they have very, very little leverage against anyone else, right? Especially against the Americans when they're buying the oil and gas.
Europe still has agency. Who wouldn't want this? Who wouldn't want this lovely Europe?
Oh, let me demonstrate for you. I have something here for you. Here. No, wait. It's on our milk cartons. It's on our milk cartons, on our juice cartons. So here we have some milk. When you open this, the cap is stuck there. So the cap is stuck there. So there's two problems with this, especially if you want to drink just straight from the mug. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. You have that. Drink straight from the bottle. It causes a mess. The other thing is that for whatever reason, due to the tension it causes, the uneven tension, it often unscrews properly. No, it screws together properly. So it's not tight. So if you have something you need to shake after these, you're gonna have a mess very often. And
Man,
yeah,
I was in Europe last year. I can't tell you the number of times I cut my lip on those damn caps.
I tear them off usually. Yeah, I typically tear them off, or like, but you have to use two hands to drink from a carton, for example, which is like, you see, that's the level of the level of inefficiency goes down to your fridge, what you have in your fridge, your packaging of your milk, for fuck's sake, unbelievable.
Sorry to cut you off.
Hey guys, gotta go. It's been a pleasure. See you soon.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I'll send you a link to the Telegram chat.
Awesome.
Yes, nice to
Fuck
see
yeah.
you again, Gabriel.
Yeah. Have a good one, man.
See you soon. Next
But,
week. Next week.
Yeah, next week, same bat time, same bat channel.
Yeah, we're close
like,
enough.
share, subscribe. Whoever seeth.
Like, share, subscribe, and share. And yeah, you can also join us on these conversations. You don't have to be on camera to join. The link in the, if you got something to say and you wanna, you can be off camera and do so. So and I'm looking at you, Anders. Jeg ser på deg akkurat nå. Du skal komme på nå, okay? Because I have told you before, like when Wyatt was trying the Discord open mic, where people would be permitted to join without being on camera, you joined, all right? You all right? Okay. So yeah, you should do that too, because Nunya permits.
I don't care if people are on camera or not. Like, yeah, it's fine. Whatever.
Yeah, but
should we wrap it up? We've been going for over 2 hours. You know what I'm most proud of today? We did not mention Ukraine once. We barely talked about Iran. There's lots of other geopolitics going on in the world, and it's refreshing to not get tied up into the minutia of all that crap. So,
Yeah, well,
but
I especially when it comes to like Iran, it gets like the cyclicality becomes like too much of a theater, right? Like I find it, like, because I've delved into a little bit on the internals, like I find it fascinating, the makeup of it and the dynamics, how that builds up. And the Gulf states, for example, they don't necessarily want the Islamic Republic destroyed. They just want it weakened enough so that it doesn't pose a threat. But they don't want it gone, like completely, because they don't want it to become like a back to US influence, because that means that they will lose their influence and actually be dominated, because this goes back to what we touched on, hegemon, right? They are a natural regional hegemon, historically, like one of the oldest and greatest, right? So by pure location, and also by culture and resource and everything touched on. So yeah, but anyways, I'm not going to keep up.
Well, Coping, do you have any final words? I think I'll join you on that other chat that you mentioned too, if I get a chance, like after I leave here. Do you have any final closing thoughts before we take off? This was good chat. I enjoyed talking about Spain and the currency collapse and all this crap. It was kind of cool.
Yes, I also enjoyed the breadth and depth of the topics that we went across, and it was also, yeah, it was generally speaking, I if I have one thing to say to the people watching, apart from joining on, liking, subscribing, all that, but also, if of all the things, it's a bit difficult to kind of share an entire stream with all that content. So if you have like parts of it that you listen through, whether you were on the live stream or you're watching post recording, do leave a timestamp on it in the comments, so that if you think that Nunya, yes, I'm going to put extra work on Nunya, right? So if you think Nunya should maybe make a clip, be it a short, so maybe a 10-minute one, a 30-minute one, or whatever your suggestion is, it's a feedback, right? The feedback is important, because self-explanatory, I think there. So yeah, those little things help a lot. Apart from that, yeah, thank you very much, Nunya,
Like,
and for
share,
hosting,
and
and
comment.
everyone for watching.
Yeah, like, share, and comment, and subscribe to this channel if you like this kind of content. Coping and I are geopolitics nerds, and we love reading about this stuff and talking about this stuff. So if that's your thing, just getting opinions from everyday people and not the quote experts that you see on CNN or wherever, by all means, hit join, hit like, hit subscribe, and anybody who joins the open mic gets access to our Telegram channel where we share information as well. Mostly we just share funny memes too, but it's always a good time, and we'll take care for the next week. Hopefully, we get some new stuff to talk about next week, as I'm sure we will, and we'll check you out same time next week, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Have a good one. Thanks for your input, Coping, and we'll see you guys next week. Cheers.
Thanks for hosting and thanks for watching.
All right.
Bye.
Cheers.